All right, welcome back to the CTMU. We left off on page 10. We're making very slow progress, but hopefully we can make another dent into this. No question, no answer. In a quantum experiment, the measuring device and its placement correspond to a question and the result to its answer. The existence of the answer, consisting of information on state, is predicated on the asking of the question or the occurrence of the measurement, and the kind of answer received depends on the kind of question asked and the manner in which it is posed. The world is thus composed of measurement events in which information is exchanged by objects, one or both of which ask a question, and one or both of which give an answer. Question and answer, the simulation or the stimulation and observation of an event, cannot be separated on the ontological level, and they cannot be shielded from the influence of the environment. At the root of this criterion are quantum uncertainty and complementarity, the foundation stones of quantum mechanics. So this is kind of seems to be essentially the query stuff that we looked at with John Wheeler, the It from Bit. I was thinking we could read something quick from John Wheeler, but he actually kind of explained it up here pretty well. So, and I remember looking up kind of John Wheeler's, and it was actually a little bit harder to understand than it was the same thing, but it was a little less succinct than Chris's explanation. So I figure we stick with that. The super Copernican principle. Just as Copernicus displaced geocentricity with heliocentricity, showing by extension that no particular place in the universe is special, and thereby repudiating here-centeredness. The super Copernican principle says that no particular point in time is special, repudiating now-centeredness. Essentially, this means that where observer participation functions retroactively, the participatory burden is effectively distributed throughout time. So although the bit size of the universe is too great to have been completely generated by observer participants who have thus far existed, future generations of observer participants, possibly representing modes of observer participation other than that associated with human observation, have been and are now weighing in from the future. The relevance of this principle to the participatory anthropic principle is self-evident. So interesting, he's basically predicating or positing retrocausality. Kind of a heavy, kind of a strong retrocausality too. And also like a plasticity of history, as those, I mean, essentially, if you have this kind of notion of history, it might as well be like just memory, or the past is just memory. So you should kind of be careful with your treatment of time, because it would essentially just be, you know, the past would essentially just be memory, and the future would be potentia, or maybe the agents would that manifest in the future because they're eternal, do exist in the now, but it is kind of weird to have like time like this, like very plastic time, but it's ontological. It's kind of like a fabric, because you have things in the future existing basically currently in a more literal, immediate sense that are affecting the present. There's probably ways to explain that without reifying time, but I would be careful with that. Anyways, consciousness. Wheeler emphasizes the difficulty of making a general distinction between the form of information processing characteristic of humans and that characteristic of various complex systems and devices that may or may not be conscious. The line between the unconscious and the conscious begins to fade, he states. We may someday have to enlarge the scope of what we mean by a who. The term who, he suggests, is too specific to man, life, and consciousness. Its anthropic connotations are anti-Copernican. While the concepts of life and consciousness are subject to revision as science advances, it would seem more reasonable, he suggests, to dismiss for the present the semantic overtones of who and explore and exploit the insights to be won from the phrases communication and communication employed to establish meaning. So I do remember when Chris is talking about tellers that he basically considers objects to some extent to be agents, like lower on a hierarchy, of course, but which I don't think is necessary. Like, okay, so take the human body. Do we have to infinitely subdivide like our own self-objectification and ascribe subjects to parts like hair, like inorganic parts? Cells, kind of. And I think you would do that with uh, an entelechy, which, well, actually, technically it doesn't mean this, but the way I'm using it, I mean an order that contains smaller orders. But in this sense, a soul that contains other souls. And the ones that are being
So
contained.
A lot just like how a body is composed of cells.
Exactly, right. So, and the cells exist like purely in reference to the body. And if those cells had some kind of soul, some kind of independent soul, it would exist in reference to the body. But I don't think it's necessary, you know? It's like, okay, if there was, like, let's say planet Earth had some kind of soul, then, you know, inorganic stuff like rocks and mountain dirt and sand, right, and water. Well, the water has interesting properties. Shouldn't have to, you know, each have its own, like each atom its own thing. Maybe an entelechy would make sense, but it would just be the body of that soul that could be subdivided. But anyways, okay. More is different. The potential for complexity increases with cardinality. With large numbers of elements comes combinatorial variety and the potential for the sort of multi-level logical structure that typifies biological organisms and modern computers alike. This is a fundamental precept of complexity theory. Okay, interesting. Complexity theory, yeah. Eric was talking about how this would get into that earlier today. Wheeler poses a question. Will we someday understand time and space and all the other features that distinguish physics and existence itself as the self-generated organs of a self-synthesized information system? Together with these pithy slogans, questions, precautions, and clues add up to a call for a new strain of reality theory, a unified conceptual mode for our thoughts and observations. How many of the models currently being held forth respond to this call? The answer, of course, is almost none. While some of them seem to address one or two of the questions and meet one or two of the criteria, none comes close to addressing and meeting all of them. What each model has been forced to give in order to meet any small subset of criteria has costed dearly in terms of meeting the others. Thus, we have the thesis and antithesis in the form of classical physics and discrete quantum models. But because of the full depth of the relationship between the two is unfathomed, no synthesis. Virtually everybody seems to acknowledge the correctness of Wheeler's insights, but the higher order relationships required to put it all together in one big picture have proven elusive. The logical difficulty of answering all of the questions And meeting all of the criteria at once in parallel using integrated, logically tractable concepts has proven prohibitive. Can this situation be redressed? Some additional principles. Sometimes I just like to. Okay. Okay, some additional principles. Although insights regarding the ideal and or perceptual basis of reality go back millennia, we may as well start with some their more recent proponents for the sake of continuity. Okay. First, Descartes posited that reality is mental in the sense of rationalism, but contradicted his own thesis by introducing mind body dualism, Cartesian dualism, the notion that mind and matter are irreducibly separate. The empiricist Berkeley then said that reality is perceptual in nature, a kind of intersect of mind and matter. This can be seen by mentally subtracting perception from one's conception of reality. What remains is pure subjective cognition, but without any objective grist for the perceptual mill. Okay. Although attempts to cognitively subtract cognition from reality are far more common, they are a bit like trying to show that a sponge is not inherently wet while immersing it in water, and can never be successful on the part of cognitive entities. So, yeah, so like a subject with no way that it is, which would be kind of a self object. Interesting. Okay. Hume then attempted to do away with cognition and causation entirely, asserting that both mind and matter adhere in perception and exist apart from neither it nor each other. In disposing of mind, Hume made another salient contribution to reality theory. He attempted to dispose of causation by identifying it as a cognitive artifact, supporting his thesis with the problem of induction. Is Hume also the one who came up with bundle theory? I believe he is. Someone can, one of you college boys can confirm that. Actually, he is. Yeah. Yeah. Bundle theory's awful. God awful.
What is bundle theory? Just a
Bundle theory.
quick
And
breakdown.
also, why I said awful.
Why did I say awful?
What is it and why is it awful?
So, bundle theory, let me see if I can not. Let me see if I can hit the mark here. Bundle theory basically posits that instead of having like a coherent mind, like a coherent agent, like a one thing that the subjectivity is, that it's actually an illusion created by a totaling up of experiences and like moments basically and operations, or like moments of operation, and by totaling these up you get the appearance of like a coherent structure, but that's not actually like a unified thing. But it doesn't really make sense because what is totaling them, what is allowing, like what structure is allowing for those things to happen and for them to be weighed against one another. So I mean, you can literally you basically treat it with syndiphionesis actually.
I mean, also, if you want to prove that it's not actually queer and that it's just an accident, then you should be able to, separate it without causing any actual difference in it, right? Show that, okay, from this side it's an illusion, if that's what it really is, saying that consciousness is just an illusion. And it's also weird to say that the primary thing which you're interacting with the world with is an illusion, but the thing you see through your perceptions through this illusion are indeed true.
Yeah, it's very, it's a very odd
I think Hume
thing.
also kept God around for some reason. Like, it feels very like you have all this, yeah, well, also God exists.
Yeah, oh, that's such a good point because a lot of these guys who like have really weird theories, they're also theists. So it's like, yeah, this is how reality works, but yeah, also God. That is a great point. Um, okay, let's continue from the problem of induction states that because empirical induction entails the prior assumption of that which it seeks to establish, namely the uniformity of nature, science is circular and fundamentally flawed. The problem of induction is very real. It is manifest in Heisenberg uncertainty and the cosmic horizon problem. Finite limitations of scientific tools of microscopic and macroscopic observation, and is why no general theory of reality can ever be reliably constructed by the standard empirical methods of science. Okay, I know what Heisenberg uncertainty is. Does anybody know what the cosmic horizon problem?
Heisenberg's, it may be a mix up, but Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is that if the more certain you are, I think it's the velocity of an electron, the less certain you will have to be with its position, and
Right.
vice versa. The more certain
Yes.
you of its position, the less certain of its velocity. Right, and these are just wherever you focus, you lose the other.
Right. Do you know what the cosmic horizon problem is?
My, I have an educated guess, which is it's probably something to do with the what we look at the cosmic horizon, but other than that, I have no idea actually.
We can we can revisit that, but okay. Okay. Unfortunately, many scientists have either dismissed this problem or quietly given up on the search for a truly general theory. In neither case serving the long-term interests of science. In fact, the problem of induction merely implies that a global theory of reality can only be established by the rational methods of mathematics, specifically including those of logic. In response to Berkeley and Hume, Kant asserted that the unprimed cognition which remains when perceptual content is subtracted has intrinsic structure that exists prior to content. It comprises the a priori categories of perceptual or phenomenal reality. Unfortunately, subtracting perception according to Kantian rules yields more than unprimed cognition. It also yields noumena, absolute objects or things in themselves. On one side of the result is a perceptual isomorphism between the mind and phenomenal reality. On the other yawns a chasm, on the far side of which sits an unknowable and nonetheless fundamental noumenal reality, which Kant evidently regards as the last word in sub-theological reality theory. Yeah.
I also found what the horizon problem is,
Yeah.
which is like I have a nice illustration from Wikipedia if I can get the chat up quickly. It's basically that if you look at one part of the horizon, it looks a lot like the other part of the horizon, which because they're partially disconnected regions which are somehow alike to each other, and the problem is how would that interact with the other. And the uncertainty principle is what I said. I googled it. So it's for us like, okay, if it's over there, how is it affected by something? How many years? Like that would be roughly. I'm not going to do trigonometry. Something greater than 15 million light years away.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So on Kant, um, I've always found it a little bit weird because in order for this like disconnect to or between the noumena and the perceiver, well, okay, for one, you kind of reify an externality, but you also assume that there actually is a distance between them. Like, I'm not sure what Kant thinks is justifying this kind of like ontological distance between the things in themselves and that which is perceiving them. That would kind of imperfect the perception of them, subjectify them. Of course, I mean, they are subjective and they probably are shifted somewhat, but I think any way in which they could be shifted would be coherent with the thing itself. Yeah, okay. However, let me go ahead and. Kant's chasm is so deep and wide and so thoroughly interdicts any mind reality isomorphism that it precludes causal efficacy, and for that matter, any other comprehensible principle of correspondence. Balian reference. This implies that noumena are both rationally and empirically irrelevant to cognitive and perceptual reality, and thus that they can be safely eliminated from reality theory. Whatever Kant had in mind when he introduced the concept of a noumenon, his definition essentially amounts to inconceivable concept and is thus an oxymoron. Whatever he really meant, we must rely on something other than Kantian metaphysics to find it. Okay. Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical of Kant. A little bit. Sure, there's some good stuff in there.
For me, it's just the ethics for my part. The whole, like, you must always act according to, what is it, principles. So you must tell a robber, if, like a murderer, if the person they're trying to murder is in your house. I remember an example like that.
Oh, that's weird. I was almost like agreeing with, yeah, you should be super principled, but you should. What? That's like a weird.
Don't lie. So if someone asks you, where is this person I intend to murder, you must tell them the truth.
Damn, bro. I like those memes of Kant where he's like, yeah, never mind. Thus far, we have managed to narrow reality down to the phenomenal reality studied by science, a combination of perceptual content and rational principles of cognition. A scientist employs empirical methods to make specific observations, applies general cognitive relationships from logic and mathematics in order to explain them, and comes off treating reality as a blend of perception and cognition. But this treatment lacks anything resembling an explicit justification. When a set of observations is explained with a likely set of equations interpreted therein, the adhesion between explanandum, whoopsie, and explanation might as well be provided by rubber cement, i.e., scientific explanations and interpretations glue observations and equations together in a very poorly understood way. It often works like a charm, but why? One of the main purposes of reality theory is to answer this question. Okay, so that's a point I really like. Why do certain equations or mathematical theorems map onto observations better than other ones? You know, for the same purpose, that is. Well, it kind of, immediately means that there is something that one is more effectively mapping for its purposes, something kind of metastructural about reality. So science and physics isn't just nominal. It's not like there was this guy debating Arval, Joseph Bronsky. Yeah, he was making a terrible point that we kind of just use theories because they happen to work in like a given instance. Well, it's very easily refutable because if one equation works better than another, I don't know if Eric said that, but anyways, if one equation works better than another.
Also, Joseph Bronsky follows in the Anglo tradition of having a very materialistic form. God is real and stuff.
Yeah. Oh boy, yeah. Materialist theism, very interesting stuff. But yeah, if one theory maps onto reality with more efficiency than another, it means there's something metastructural that it is more effectively mapping. Anyways, so that's a good point from Chris. The first thing to notice about this question is that it involves a process of attribution, and that the rules of attribution are set forth in stages by mathematical logic. The first stage is called sentential logic. It contains the rules for ascribing the attributes true or false, respectively, denoting inclusion or non-inclusion in arbitrary cognitive perceptual systems, to hypothetical relationships in which predicates are linked to the logical function or functors, not and, or, implies and, if and only if. Okay. Sentential logic. Okay. Sentential logic defines these functors as truth functions, assigning truth values to such expressions, irrespective of the contents, but not the truth values of their predicates, thus affecting a circular definition of functors on truth values and truth values on functors. The next stage of attribution, predicate logic, ascribes specific properties to objects using quantifiers. And the final stage, model theory, comprises the rules for attributing complex relations of predicates to complex relations of objects, i.e., theories to universes. In addition, the form of attribution called definition is explicated in a theory-centric branch of logic called formalized theories, and the mechanics of functional attribution is treated in recursion theory. All right. In sentential logic, a tautology is an expression of functor-related sentential variables that is always true regardless of the truth values assigned to its sentential variables themselves. Okay, the opposite of a contradiction. I actually just made a Twitter post about tautology. Because I actually learned about tautology from this document, but then I learned about how it's generally just used as like a diminutive term for when people say the same thing twice. Like, it's not raining, it's a clear day, or something like that. But there is some magic in that. If you construct something that's always true, or even if you make a tautology about something that doesn't exist in phenomenal reality, because I've in these Instagram group chats I used to host, I would get some people debating this with me, and an example they would use is, what about tautology involving like a unicorn? Well, in the context of like what is actually being predicated in the tautology, it is totally true. It doesn't necessarily have to refer to literal reality or like non-fictional reality. So in the context of a fiction, it's still, tautologically true. But if you can make a tautology kind of include or like fully extend itself and not preclude anything in non-fictional reality, then I believe that is what Chris will basically unravel. That's probably not that simply into a super tautology, but let's continue on there. A tautology has three key properties. It is universally syntactically true. It is thus self-referential, true even of itself, and therefore closed under recursive self-composition. So yeah, if it's honestly, I would say self-contained first and then self-referential, because if it's self-contained, it has to be self-referential, and its implications remain consistent under inferential operations preserving these properties. Okay. That is, every tautology is a self-consistent circularity of universal scope, possessing validity by virtue of closure under self-composition, comprehensiveness, non-exclusion of truth, and consistency, freedom of irresolvable paradox. So, yeah. So if you add a tautology with like a full scope of reality, anything should be, any kind of inferential operation should be consistent with it. But tautologies are not merely consistent unto themselves, they are mutually consistent under mutual composition, making sentential logic as much a self-consistent circularity of universal scope as any one of its tautologies. Okay. Thus, sentential logic embodies two levels of tautology. one applying to expressions and one applying to theoretical systems thereof. Predicate logic then extends to tautology concept to cover the specific acts of attribution represented by formally anonymous sentential variables, and model theory goes on to encompass more complex acts of attribution involving more complex relationships. Okay, hold on a sec. Let's see. I'm assuming that's not a CTMU term, but sometimes he has stuff in here. Anyways, I'd like to get a little definition here. Okay. Okay, it's the same as propositional logic. Or statement logic. Okay, is the branch of logic that studies ways of joining and or modifying entire proposition statements or sentences to form more complicated propositions, statements, or sentences, as well as the logical relationships and properties that are derived from these methods of combining or altering statements. In propositional logic, the simplest statements are considered as indivisible units. Hence, propositional logic does not study those logical properties. Okay. And I will actually go ahead and for next time, see if there's any interesting stuff on complexity theory and what is model theory, because that might be helpful going forward. Reality theory is about the stage of attribution in which two predicates analogous to true and false, namely real and unreal, are ascribed to various statements about the real universe. In this sense, it is closely related to sentential logic. In particular, sentential logic has four main properties to be emulated by reality theory. The first is absolute truth. As the formal definition of truth, it is true by definition. The other properties are closure, comprehensiveness, and consistency. I.e., logic is wholly based on and defined strictly within the bounds of cognition and perception. It applies to everything that can be coherently perceived or conceived, and it is by its very nature consistent, being designed in a way that precludes inconsistency. It is the basis of mathematics, being the means by which propositions are stated, proved, or disproved, and it is the core of science, underwriting the integrity of rational and empirical methodology. Even so-called non-standard logics, e.g., modal, fuzzy, and many-valued logics, must be expressed in terms of fundamental two-valued logic to make sense. In short, two-valued logic is something without which reality could not exist. Okay. Interesting. If it were eliminated, then true and false, real and unreal, and existence and non-existence, maybe even being and non-being, could not be distinguished, and the merest act of perception or cognition would be utterly impossible. I think this would also tie in not just to whether something is real or having a notion, a concept of real and unreal, but also is and is not, in the sense of definition, like what something is and what it is not. So you can't cognize without definition because cognition is object oriented, and so is perception, actually. If there's nothing to perceive or cognize, is someone going to say something? Don't be shy. Okay, no, I'm just messing with you. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And if there's anything in here that doesn't make sense, like I just looked up propositional logic. Okay, I'm sure some of you probably know what that is, but happy to.
One thing I did want to clarify, I'm kind of late to it, but was he getting at something like consciousness is layered in one of the earlier sections? He's saying it boils down to one agent ultimately.
Where was he?
This was, I should have chimed in earlier. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
was up a bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay, here we go. Wheeler emphasized the difficulty of making a general distinction between the form of information processing characteristic of... Okay, so... What I think he's kind of getting at here is that consciousness is more general than human consciousness. So if we entirely conceived of consciousness as kind of, from our viewpoint, it'd be a very particular thing. And in which case it would be hard to, have consciousness be important to reality theory because it could be conceived of as so particular, even though animals are conscious and whatnot. But I think his goal in this, well, really citing Wheeler a lot here, is to generalize it and potentially generalize it to the point of, like I kind of mentioned, having very, very, very simple forms of consciousness, or maybe at least mind. I know so when he talks about tellers, or like, I don't think he calls them tertiary tellers, but let's say like very, very simple, like the teller of a rock or something, which I'm not entirely convinced with or by the way. They would actually be unconscious, but so basically anti-Copernican here means not special, basically. So oh wait, no, sorry. The super Copernican principle means not special. Anti-Copernican means special. Whoopsie. So so yeah, he's like generalizing it. So but I think in generalizing it, it would make it it would kind of create grades, or at least different modes of consciousness. So in that way, yes. Let's see if that kind of answers your question a bit.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Or something else you meant. I mean, you basically just covered it, but yeah, when you mentioned cells, or I know Meta mentioned just like parts of a body, it's sort of where my mind went. That definitely clears it up.
Yeah, I think with things that are like obviously organic, it yeah, I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced by it, but I mean, I guess it would make sense to have like a very basic agent that is exists kind of, contained by your higher or more extensive being, I should say. And probably the same thing is true of humans, like we kind of exist. Actually, it might not be true of humans, now that I think about it. I mean, yeah, the
Yet
speculation
there
here
is
might...
one ultimate agent. That's the question here.
That there's more than one ultimate agent? No. No, yeah, we do exist. We do exist entirely in reference to more universal agents, but on our level of particularity, we are like kind of the top dog. It's just like a more universal being. It's just you just have to think about like what that kind of existence would be like. It wouldn't participate of particularity save through us, because we're contained by that more universal being. So it wouldn't be wholly, it wouldn't be like contradicting human agency in like the immediate sense. But let's continue on here. Let me do a quick time check. I think what I'll do... Okay. Okay, so sorry for being late, but we'll go a little further, and yeah. And then if anyone wants to stay for the informal, they're totally welcome. But I do understand if people are busy. So
Also want to point out a little fun thing, because earlier I remember him saying that science is self-contradictory or something like that earlier, which reminds me of my math. A math teacher I knew, right? Who his same thing was, originally he believed science and math were real. Then he just believed math was the only real thing you could study, and that may be a reason why he's a math teacher.
yeah, I could see that being definitely a motivator. I can see why people would think that. Okay. Let's continue pushing on here. Thus far, it has been widely assumed that reality theory can be sought by the same means as any other scientific theory, but this is not quite true. For while science uses the epistemological equivalent of magic glue to attach its theories to its observations, reality theory must give a recipe for the glue and justify the means of application. That is, reality theory must describe reality on a level that justifies science and thus occupies a deeper level of explanation than science itself. So, guys, just remember all of this. This is your ammunition to actually, flip the switch on materialist scientists. That metaphysics is actually the more rigorous field of study. Does this mean, which I agree with, does this mean that reality theory is mathematical? Yes, but since mathematics must be justified along with science, meta-mathematical would perhaps be a better description. Okay, meta-mathematical. He actually has a text like on meta-mathematics, I think, which would be very interesting to get into, even though I might definitely need some of the math guys in there. I'm not particularly good at it, but anyways, would perhaps be a better description. And when all is said and done, this comes down to logic, pure and simple. It follows that reality theory must take the form of an extended logic, in fact, a limiting form of logic in which the relationship between theory and universe, until now an exhaustible and an inexhaustible source of destructive model theoretic ambiguity, is at last reduced to dual aspect, monic form, short-circuiting the paradox of Cartesian dualism and eliminating the epistemological gap between mind and matter, theory and universe. Okay, hold on. Let's reread that. Okay. It follows that reality theory must take the form of an extended logic, in fact, a limiting form of logic in which the relationship between theory and universe, until now an inexhaustible source of destructive model theoretic ambiguity, is at last reduced to dual aspect monic form, short-circuiting the paradox of Cartesian dualism and eliminating the epistemological gap between mind and matter, theory and universe. Okay. As complexity rises and predicates become theories, tautology and truth become harder to recognize. Because universality and specificity are at odds in practice, if not in principle. They are subject to a kind of logical decoherence associated with relational stratification. Because predicates are not always tautological. They are subject to various kinds of ambiguity as they become increasingly specific and complex. It becomes harder to locally monitor the heritability of consistency and locally keep track of the truth property in the course of attribution, or even after the fact. Undecidability, LSAT and intractability and MP completeness, predicate ambiguity and Lowenheim's Golem theorem, observational ambiguity and the Duhem-Quine thesis. Okay. I recognize that one. I actually don't know what it is, but, you guys probably recognize. Arval talks about it all the time. These are some of the problems that emerge once the truth predicate decoheres with respect to complex attributive mappings. It is for reasons like these that the philosophy of science has fallen back on falsification doctrine, giving up on the tautological basis of logic, effectively demoting truth to provisional status and discouraging full appreciation of the tautological syntactic level of scientific inquiry, even in logic and philosophy themselves. Okay, so real quick, these are the problems that emerge once the truth predicate decoheres with respect to complex attributive mappings. Okay, let's actually look some of these up so we can kind of get a good idea of what that looks like. And I'm actually most interested in the Duhem-Quine thesis. Okay. Okay. Is a form of the thesis of the underdetermination of theory by empirical evidence. Okay. Posits that it is impossible for to experimentally test a scientific hypothesis in isolation because an empirical test of the hypothesis requires one or more background assumptions, also called auxiliary assumptions or auxiliary hypotheses. The thesis says that unambiguous scientific falsifications are impossible. It is named after French theoretical physicist Pierre Duhem and American logician. Okay, whatever. Overview. Thesis argues that no scientific hypothesis predictions. That an experiment works as predicted, or that previous scientific theory is accurate. That the Earth is in motion. Some people objected that birds do not get thrown off the sky when they let go of tree branch. Okay. Okay, so it's using an example of like revision. Modus ponens. Modus ponens is like a convincing argument. If a hypothesis H entails evidence E, then not E entails not H. It's almost like a tautology. Okay, we'll leave it at that for that because I want to run through some of these as well. Some of these might just be too. We'll see if they're comprehensible. Okay, we're not gonna dig through that actually. Let's do this. Because it's kind of just a theory. There's not really. Okay. Lowenheim Skolem is a theorem on the existence and cardinality of models named after Leopold Lowenheim. Precise formulations as given below implies that countable first order theory has if a countable first order theory has an infinite model, then for every infinite cardinal number k, it has a model of size k, and that no first order theory with an infinite model can have a unique model up to isomorphism. Okay. As a consequence, first order theories are unable to control the cardinality of their infinite models. So model theory incongruence. Okay. All right, we'll leave it at that. Okay. In fact, the validity of scientific theories and of science as a whole absolutely depends on the existence of a fundamental reality theoretic framework spanning all of science, a fundamental syntax from which all scientific and mathematical languages and the extended cognitive language of perception itself can be grammatically unfolded, cross-related, and validated. Tautology, the theoretical basis of truth as embodied in sentential logic, is obviously the core of this syntax. Accordingly, reality theory must be developed through amplification of this tautological syntax by adjunction of additional syntactic components, the principles of reality theory, which leave the overall character of the syntax invariant, specifically in order to fashion a reality theory that has some truth property in the same sense as does logic, but permits the logical evaluation of statements about space and time and law. We must adjoin principles of extension that lend meaning to such statements while preserving the tautology property. Okay. All right, so let's see. I'm going to read this paragraph and then we're going to stop for the day. And next time I might just, okay, I won't be late for one. But next time we might do like a 90-minute. Of course, people could drop off if they needed to. Just so we can get a little bit further. We're averaging about 5 pages. But yeah, I mean it's very dense, so I don't feel too bad about that. Okay, according to the nature of sentential logic, truth is tautologically based on the integrity of cognitive and perceptual reality. cognition and perception comprise the primitive, self-definitive basis of logic, and logic comprises the rules of structure and inference, under which perception and cognition are stable and coherent. So when we say that truth is heritable under logical rules of inference, we really mean that tautology is heritable, and that the primitive cognitive perceptual basis of sentential logic thus maintains its primary status. By converting tautologies into other tautologies, the rules of inference and sentential logic convert cognitive perceptual invariants into other such invariants. To pursue this agenda in reality theory, we must identify principles that describe how the looping structure of logical tautology is manifest in various reality theoretic settings and contexts on various levels of description and interpretation. That way, we can verify its preservation under the operations of theoretic reduction and extension, i.e., we must join generalized principles of loop structure to logical syntax in such a way that more and more of reality is thereby explained and comprehensiveness is achieved. So that's very dense. However, it does seem tenable that kind of, a lot of the essence of logic is looking, or truth rather, or both, is looking for what has no contradiction. That is what's true, is what doesn't contradict itself. Because when you're ruling out falsehoods, you're actually identifying contradictions. So in a way, you are actually identifying tautology. And converting tautologies into other tautologies. So let me see if I can just come up with an example of that. So let's say a priori, God is absolute by virtue of like the definition of God. God is absolute. The absoluteness necessitates other properties. So God must then situate mind and matter in some way. Not necessarily. It's not necessarily predicating in what way. But I mean, you basically can take a tautology like that, and the derivation that I just made wasn't a tautology necessarily, but you can deduce a lot of necessary truths when the tautology is made at scale. Of course, that was kind of an assumption, for example, but so yeah, if God is absolute, then there can be no privation of God, and likewise, there can be no gradation being a partial privation. So there can't be anything that God isn't. So, I mean, immediately you necessitate monism, or, non-pluralism, which means that it doesn't necessarily mean that mind and matter have to be relegated to a third neutral thing. In fact, it doesn't even necessarily reify matter, because it would be perfectly well situated in the context of the other, but materialism is essentially by default pluralistic, so you can rule that out. That's like identifying a little contradiction, unless you just have, like, I don't know, a self-dividing particle, mega particle. I don't know. But I think materialism is basically just pluralism, because there's plural stuff, objects, and that in order to reconcile that to some kind of more sophisticated notion of materialism, you're making metaphysical assertions. But yeah, you can basically derive a lot of truth just from, one, like, very extensive tautology. Of course, you then do have to maintain that tautology, but it's a tautology if somebody identifies it as, untrue or a contradiction. It's not invalidating the notion of tautology. It's just that thing wasn't actually a tautology, that statement. So, and it seems like he's kind of getting into how these more universal tautologies kind of lend themselves to more particular ones and vice versa. manifest in various ways or various reality theoretic settings and context, depending on the level of description and interpretation. Level of description, I'm assuming he kind of means the level of definition, which would be kind of particularity. But yeah, we will stop there. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you want to join, go ahead and message me at metamundanity on Twitter, X, or Instagram. And yeah, take care.